Hello, hello, and welcome to the Aware Show. I am Lisa Garr, and I'm really, really excited about today's conversation because it has to do with anyone who has a brain. So if you are listening, you're lucky because we're going to be talking all about your turned on, switched on brain today. And I'm really looking forward to that. And if you are listening to this on our podcast or on the radio shows, you can just go wherever you listen to podcasts. You can always look up The Aware Show because you are going to want to share this with friends. So wherever you listen to your podcast, just search The Aware Show and share it with a friend because sharing is caring. So I had this experience, as you might know, is that I had a very rough accident about a year ago. This is my second major concussion from a bike accident. None of them were planned, and both of them caused an enormous amount of brain inflammation. Now, anyone who's been through a concussion knows you have the foggy thinking, you're sensitive to light, sound, you have spouts of rage and anger because the brain is swollen, all of that, but you don't know the level of inflammation that's actually in the brain that's impacting your gut, your mood, your relationship with your vision, everything. And it's a sleeper. It's definitely a sleeper until I met Regan Archibald. And he did a lecture at a conference I was at. And he talked all about certain blood tests that measure for markers in the body of inflammation, inflammatory markers. And he has a great story he's going to share with us today. But when I took this blood test, this specific blood test, I had 100, I don't know, like a huge high number of inflammatory markers in my brain. I didn't even know it. I'm operating, kind of in the dark, had no idea. It was all showing up in my brain. So I thank you and I welcome you, Regan Archibald. Thanks for
Yeah,
joining me.
really appreciate being here, Lisa, and I'm so glad your brain's working.
Ah,
I mean, you got a gorgeous brain, and so, but it's like when it's offline, it's just really challenging to take on the day.
it's terrible. And my husband was actually the one that was really saying he was really worried because I couldn't follow a line of thinking. My thinking was so diffused. It was like ADD on crack. It was so bad. And I was flipping words. Breakfast was dinner and letters. I would start words with the letter from the last word. It was so crossed. My brain signals were completely crossed and it was bothered. I couldn't type. So I was really worried. And I just, could have kept going like that until I saw you at a lecture. And so let's talk a little bit about you are one of the leading peptide specialists in the nation. And Regan also serves as a regenerative therapy and peptide consultant at EastWest Health, which he founded. So let's talk about the role of peptides in the body, not even about the brain, the whole body.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. So peptides is something that I've been obsessed with for over a decade because whenever I look at health, I think many of you out there have experienced a health crisis. I'm sure all of you have. So I'll just place it at that. And if you think about those health crises that become chronic, like in your case, Lisa, I'm sure you had days where you wondered if your brain would ever come back to where it was prior to your accident. And
Yes.
what was that feeling like for you when you're in that state?
I was in the dark. I was really scared. I thought I'm experiencing early Alzheimer's. I have Alzheimer's in the family. I thought, oh my God, I activated that genetic marker because I thought I had, my whole life I've been biohacking my whole family genetics. And
Yeah.
here I thought, oh great, this one massively stressful event turned on those genetic markers. That's what I thought.
Yeah, and it puts you in a place where, if you look at the way medicine handles things like concussions or genetics, if you have that APO44 variant, it's like, well, there's nothing you can do. But what we've realized with peptides is they can turn on the genes that we want expressed, and they can turn off the genes that we don't want expressed. And so the way I got into peptides is after I treated my brain. I've had 6 concussions. I grew up on a cattle ranch in Idaho, and we used to race dirt bikes, and we, football, and skateboarding, snowboarding, all the things that are kind of dangerous, mountain biking, which hopefully we'll do here in Deer Valley. You're going to be cruising in the mountains soon, but
But we'll stay
but
on the bikes
yeah,
and not do
please.
this concussion
Yeah.
thing.
Because even helmets, that they're not a guarantee for safety.
Right.
But the thing about it is, after I had my concussions, my personality changed. I had different preferences for friends. I lost my desire to go to, to like participate in school, and I was always very engaged in school. Yeah,
Mhm.
I completely changed the way I dressed. I mean, it was weird. And then about a year later, I like, it was almost like all the inflammation in the brain was reversed, and I felt better. But I always had a pretty severe ADD. And so I was at the stem cell conference, and we'd always treated the brain with a drug called mannitol. And we had these ER doctors that would come in, and they would use mannitol, and that would open up the blood-brain barrier enough so that we could do an IV of stem cells and hope that enough stem cells made it through the blood-brain barrier to actually capture the areas of the brain that were damaged. And we did see some decent results. But when I was at this conference, Arnold Kaplan talked about the fact that you can use a device called the sphenocath, where it's a nasal mist, and it gets stem cells into the back of the sinuses, and then those stem cells can migrate through the sinuses and activate, based on where the damage is, they activate stem cell proliferation in that area, and they tag the stem cells. And I just watched the stem cells go into areas of people's brains that had TBIs. And so I was so ecstatic when he was done with the lecture. I was like the first one to greet him out of this big group of people. And I was like, can I get a picture? And then I'm like, what device did you use? And he's like, oh, we use a sphenocath. And I'm like, great, we have those at the clinic. So I went right back to the clinic, and I used the sphenocath, and we did my treatment. So I'm the first person outside of a clinical trial to have the intranasal stem cells. And that
Wow.
night I went to bed, I slept 11 hours, and it was like all the memories were being organized in my brain of my life. And I woke up and I could hear birds chirping. My brain was quiet for the first time that I could ever remember in my life. And so I thought that
Mhm.
was such a profound experience. I started researching the ways that I could continue the progress of the stem cells. And that's where I learned about peptides. So I learned about this Dr. Guardier. He was in Eastern Europe. A lot of his research was done in Romania and in Russia. And he's known for phrasing nootropics. So nootropics are, you could consider coffee as a nootropic. And I'm sure 95% of your listeners drink coffee because it's a way of enhancing cognition without, it's got minimal side effects, if you dose it properly.
Temporary, yes, temporarily, right?
Temporary, but it's not like, but then that you'd look at other things that he was studying, and then you start saying, oh, there's these substances like Nupep and aniracetam and cerebrolysin and CMAX and Selenk, and so he was able to formulate all these amazing, nootropics that were peptides that already exist in the body. And he realized that he could actually help the athletes perform better. He found that, people who were shift workers perform better. They had better cognitive skills, especially in the engineering field. And that got me excited about peptides. And then I started learning about peptides that work on the immune system and peptides for regeneration. And then I learned about peptides that could actually help build muscle and reverse age. And so
Wow.
I've just became obsessed with peptides. And I think every day I have a more and more of a love affair with peptides because I see the transformational benefits of them.
So do we start with a certain amount of peptides in our body and then they die off as we age? How does that work?
Yeah, so everybody has, you've got to have peptides. I mean, the old way of thinking was we've identified about 7,000 peptides in the body, and these are kind of the core peptides. But as we age, it's not necessarily that that the peptides they're there, but we lose the ability to get the signaling from the peptides. And so the peptides basically become somewhat dormant. It's kind of like if you don't use a muscle, your thighs are going to get a little bit weak, and it's going to be harder and harder to stand up out of your chair, to go for the hike that you want to go on.
Definitely. So we
And
lose that ability to get the signal. So this is a chain reaction, like an amino acid, right?
that's it. Yeah, because the signal is just if you remember like microRNA and messenger RNA from biology, and so
Hmm.
your cell sends a message, and it's this protein structure called RNA, and then that RNA, there's an envelope that opens up, and then a peptide comes out, and it's a specific shape, and there's receptors on the surface of the skin, and then it's like a key that turns the lock and opens up that gate, and then the gene gets turned on, and then once you turn on that gene, it's like, hey, Regan, we just made your brain younger, and or Lisa, we just reversed a lot of inflammation, and we create all these new angiogenic pathways. So it's basically like the universe wants to recycle us after about the age of 35, and I think we've all experienced that. And that's really when we lose a lot of that signaling property. And so what we want to do is just stay ahead of that. And then especially if you've had traumas, if you've been exposed to chemicals, if you've had infections, then
Stress.
yeah,
And
or
then,
stress, emotional stress is a big one.
wow, that's so interesting. Wait, you just said if you've had TBIs, exposed to chemicals, stress, harmful, like drugs and alcohol, all it pretty much that like checks everyone listening right now. Not the drugs and
and
alcohol part, but the stress, the
oh,
everything, everything.
well, and the other one are infections, because we can have Lyme disease that gets right into that fatty tissue in the brain. They're like little corkscrews, those little spirochetes. They just bury themselves right in that fatty tissue. Um,
Wow.
and that's where peptides are phenomenal for Lyme. If you have issues with mold, like the mycotoxins, those mycotoxins, they love the fatty tissue, and the brain is primarily fat. I mean, it's more than 50% of your brain is fat. And so that's where those toxins love to hang out.
Uh, Wait, back to Lyme disease. There's really not a cure for that. I mean, not that this is a cure at all, but what do the peptides do with those little corkscrews in the brain?
So one of the things that we've learned is that there's a naturally produced peptide, and it's called an AMP peptide, an antimicrobial peptide. And it's called LL37, and it's a cathelicidin, and it only exists in humans. It's really fascinating because usually you can find the biology is very similar between mammals, for example, but in humans, this peptide is very powerful because what it does is it can break through the biofilms, and LL37, it can find the Lyme, and when the rest of the immune system kind of bypasses it, and then what it does is it opens up that biofilm, so your lymphocytes and your neutrophils and all your macrocytes can come in and eradicate it. And so
Wow.
it's an identification marker that the immune system uses. And so when LL37 is present in parts of the brain, then there's an infection. Like you'll even see higher levels of LL37 in people who have Alzheimer's because of this beta amyloid plaque that gets built up. And so that's one of the ways we treat it. And then you're using peptides like BPC157, thymosin beta 4 for the angiogenic properties and the seal up the gut. And then thymosin alpha 1 is probably one of the other most powerful therapies, because thymosin alpha 1 is a way of upregulating all of the T cells in your body. So it creates this balance between the Th1 and Th2 systems and Th17, so that your body's not in this chronic inflammatory state because of the Lyme disease.
And is a great way to see something like a chronic inflammatory state of the body being specifically around the middle area of the body where that holds on to the most inflammation, the cortisol and all of that. Is that where the you'll like if your body's in an inflammatory state, does it show up in the gut first?
It's it.
Oh,
Uh, Absolutely. Like anytime anything becomes chronic, if you have a traumatic brain injury, and we've talked about this, you'll see this nerve, the vagus nerve, gets disrupted. And so you have a complete change in your gut biome after a traumatic brain injury. And it's really fascinating because that's when you can have these pathogenic species. We see people having SIBO. And so that's where you end up getting like this overgrowth of yeast or Candida albicans typically. And then it migrates into the small intestine. And so people have like these really weird digestive symptoms, and the doctors don't even ask him like, well, maybe did you ever have any traumatic brain injuries? I mean, I had a patient of mine who she ran a martial arts studio, and she had really severe Graves' disease. Like her eyeballs
oh,
felt like they're going to fall out of her head. And she had horrible digestive symptoms. And, I asked her, she'd been to all these functional medicine doctors and all these like world famous people. And I was like, well, let's just start where no one's talked to you about, but have you had any concussions? Has anyone talked to you about that? And she said, no. I mean, why do you ask? And I said, well, have you had any? And she's like, well, yeah, I've been knocked out 11 times. I mean, I'm a martial arts instructor and I fought competitively. I was like, well, let's start there. And then literally within like 2 months, she's like a new woman. Like the medications for the thyroid would just make things worse. She couldn't sleep. I mean, and then we got rid of the SIBO. That took a little longer, but just by
mhm.
treating her brain and getting rid of that inflammation, it made a huge difference. So it often gets overlooked how connected our brain is to our gut. And I get saddened by the way that our kids eat. My kids, they had no choice. And so, but I would, when you go to people's houses, it's like, man, what we're doing to our kids, feeding them the weird food that's processed. There's no real nutrients. And that's one of the reasons I think why we have so many, mental health issues in our children.
Yeah, oh, that could be it. That's very true. And mental health issues overall. So many people have been knocked in the head, bumped in the head through sports and all sorts of things. And it is an accumulative effect in the brain. And I don't know why that is. But look, I'm gluten-free, dairy-free. I host a health show and I had two massive TBIs. And
Hmm.
I thought I was doing everything right. And that last one really was, I mean, my hair fell out. It was so bad because of this. I couldn't process the stress through my body. And I broke both shoulders and all of that. So how is a TBI cumulative over that many years?
Well, if
No.
if you think of your neurons, Lisa, like your brain cells are so powerful. I mean, they have more mitochondria than almost any other cell in the body. Actually, the eggs and your ovaries have more, but that's anyway. So you have these glial cells that protect the neurons,
Mm,
and those glial cells are like the immune responder. They're almost like the defense system. They're the street sweepers. They're similar to like sirtuin activation from NAD that protects your DNA. But these glial cells have this high functionality where they're very responsive and adaptive to what's going on in the environment around them. And when you get all these cytokines and all this inflammation that can't get flushed out of the brain, those glial cells get confused. And remember, we talked about signaling. So it's like, it's not necessarily that our peptide supply gets lower like hormones, but it's like they just don't get the signaling. And so the only peptides that are making it are the ones that turn off more of the switches. Let's get
mhm,
Regan out of the game.
mhm,
But
mhm,
but it's that signaling that needs to get cleared out, because the lymphatic circulation, if you think about sleep, it's the best detoxification for our brain. And a lot of people think, like, they think, why do we have to sleep? Well, you can go longer without food than you can without sleep. I mean, there's this Chinese dude who wanted to watch the entire World Cup. And so he said, I'm going to stay awake the whole time. And I think the World Cup's about 30 days, maybe a little longer. And so he was chain smoking cigarettes. He was drinking Red Bull. I mean, all the healthy things that you talk about on your show and promote. Yeah. But it
My
was
goodness.
okay. Edit that part out. But he was, Lisa does not
That's
talk.
intense. That's intense. Wow.
But yeah, he was trying to stay awake. And 3 weeks into the experiment, he had a grand mal seizure that killed him. And
What?
yes, because it was like your body, even like slow pieces of sleep
Why would
can re
somebody do that? Oh my gosh.
oh, it's crazy. And but yet people can go 60 days as long as they're hydrated and they can go without food.
Well, I mean,
So
this happens a lot with, I mean, I host overnight radio, and a lot of the hosts there, they have, they might sleep after the shift, but it's not this type of sleep that actually empties the trash out of the brain and detoxifies the brain. It's a too light of a sleep. And I know that from when I host overnight, the next couple of like days, I'm just messed up. And
yeah,
imagine, those guys that do these night shifts every single night. The good news about that is don't quit your night shift job, but there are ways to induce the brain into a deep trash removal sleep and detoxify the brain, even if it's 4 or 6 hours, right?
totally. Yeah, absolutely. And we've seen that in some of the studies. And so, essentially with the glial cells, when you have concussions, then your body can't flush it out. The same way if you go without sleep, most of us can handle 2, 3, even 4 nights of, kind of poor sleep. But pretty soon it catches up. And that's what happened to you on that second concussion. The glial cells were like, we're already trying to remove the trash from your first injury.
Mm.
And that's like with athletes who get put back into the game too quickly. They end up with like Parkinson's disease, ALS. They have like violent tendencies. I mean, it's
Right. Of course. Yes. And it's such, I mean, I know there's a lot of doctors like Dr. Amen that are really trying to raise awareness about this, but there's so much money involved in those games and those athletes. And that's a tough one for them. I remember reading this book, The Angel and the Assassin. Have you ever read that book about the
oh,
glial cells? And it's very, very important that you actually recover from the concussion, but not just by sitting in a dark room for a few days. It's you actually have to go actively and recover it because the brain will cope right away. It'll close in, and mine did. Mine closed in, so I couldn't see the peripheral vision of my my eyesight. I put my hand out to the side at a right angle, didn't even see it.
oh,
Nothing, not even there. And I'm
oh,
like, whoa, this is a problem. My eyesight had been reduced to about a 45-degree angle, and then I couldn't see close up. So my husband's like, why are you so close to that car? And I'm like, what do you mean? I'm not. It was bad. So these
yeah,
types of things is what, and the brain's amazing. It just adapts and adapts and adapts until it can't anymore. And when you turn on these, as you said, turn on certain cells and turn off other ones that got um, switched on that you don't want to have switched on, it's actually possible to do that. So peptides. Is low dose naltrexone a peptide?
it's technically a small molecule. Um,
Okay.
and so it's a small molecule drug. So it's because it's naltrexone, but it works on the opiate growth factors. But still, so if you use it properly, you can have phenomenal benefits. But obviously, it's also a drug that can be abused. But low dose naltrexone, it does cause the release of endorphins, and that sometimes when you have chronic inflammation in the brain and when there's glial cells get out of balance or when you have autoimmunity, you're just trying to reestablish that connection. And by stimulating these opiate-like growth factors, it's a great way of healing the brain and calming it down because you've lost the ability to release those endorphins when you're asleep primarily.
I've there's a lot of research. It's called LDN, a lot of research on this. And this is something that the normal aging process does. I mean, the normal aging process, as you said, it starts to shrink the brain, or the brain starts to go into these malfunctions. And it doesn't necessarily have to do with that, but it all starts with these blood tests, and the blood doesn't lie. And I know that you are offering, I should have probably asked you this beforehand. I know that we have something that people can fill out about these traditional, about the blood tests. And the website is agelessfuture.com. That's agelessfuture.com. By filling out this form, what do they get from filling out the form?
Well, the first thing is, if you're somebody who really wants to look deeper at your values, and if you want to say, hey, do I have some of the markers that would indicate inflammation in the brain or inflammation in the gut or anywhere in the body, we're going to run those markers. We run over 100 different markers. But before we do that, what we want to do is just get to know you. We want to get your health history. We want to make sure that maybe there's some things that we need to add into the test based on what your history is. But what that form will give you the opportunity to do is to talk to one of our health ascension specialists. And these are people who are trained, and they're very well trained in peptides. They probably know more about peptides than 90% of the doctors you'll ever talk to, or maybe 95%. So they can talk to you about potential peptides that may be beneficial for you. But the very first step is we got to get the blood work ran, because that's what predicts the treatment. And if you just throw peptides at things, I mentioned a few today, you may notice a little bit of a difference, but you're doing yourself a disservice, because there's a sequence of using these peptides where you want to find the priorities in your body, the areas where you need help the most, and focus on those areas. And then everything downstream will start to get better, and you'll start noticing a much bigger improvement and more momentum. But in the labs, I think what happens all too often in our medical system today, and I was just talking to a couple of my clients in Canada, and they're like, I can't believe how much time you're able to spend with us on our labs. And they said, you know what amount of time we get with our doctor in Canada? And they book 10 people every 15 minutes in the office there.
Oh my
And
goodness.
and I mean, so it ends up being about 2 minutes if you actually get a chance. Last time they went there, they waited for like 2.5 hours, and they finally said, hey, I had an appointment 2.5 hours ago.
Oh
And
my
so did like
gosh.
10 other people there. But it's out of control. And then in the United States, it's not much different. I mean, you may get 5 to 7 minutes, but they'll run about 20 to 24 basic markers. And as long as those markers look good, they're going to send you on your way. And usually they'll offer you a statin because your cholesterol is too high. And in most of your cases, it's not too high. Like, a statin is usually not the answer. But what we discovered, and this is through my own health crisis and my own health journey, is I discovered that if you run the right labs, and if they're comprehensive enough, then you can see the threats to your health. Even if you feel great, don't fool yourself. I've seen people who
Mm-hmm.
feel great who have a heart attack the next day. But
Yep.
these
Yep.
labs will be predictive to the
Mm.
place where we can start to sense, what may be coming upstream, but also give you some indications of what the cause is of the way that you may be feeling.
Oh my gosh, a friend of ours in their community was riding his bike and just dropped dead at a stoplight because he was healthy. He thought he was healthy, two young kids and a
Uh,
wife. And had he known that he had these, I mean, he was riding a bike and it wasn't anything intense. So the agelessfuture.com, if you fill out this form, you get the opportunity to speak with one of the health professionals and get the requisition for a blood test that hopefully your insurance can cover. If you have insurance, that usually covers blood tests, right?
Well, I wish it was that easy,
Oh,
because insurance, unfortunately, they're going to cover the basic 20 to 24 markers. But
oh,
what we've done for your listeners is we've given them a 50% discount off of the test. So instead of being 1,500, it's 750. And that
okay.
includes the entire peptide protocol, not the peptides, but it includes the meeting with our medical provider. So you go through it with one of our functional medicine doctors. You'll get all the nutritional profiles. You'll understand where your hormones are, and you'll see all the inflammatory markers in the liver, the brain, the cardiovascular system. We look at apolipoprotein A and B. All the thyroid markers are going to be included in that. But the insurance company, unfortunately, they will only cover things that they consider medically necessary. And so if you want to run a lab like this through insurance, We've had several people do that, and then their insurance company says, well, I'm sorry, Lisa, we don't find this medically necessary, and so you're going to have to pay the $3,000 or $4,000 that the lab billed us out of pocket, so you're responsible for that. So we just find that the insurance company is probably the thing that gets in the way of people's health more than anything I've seen.
Mm,
It's probably the
wow.
biggest, I don't want to say anything too
Right.
inflammatory, but I think it's probably the biggest hoax in the healthcare system today. Is we all think that because we're card carrying members that we're entitled to health. But then when you look at what the healthcare system's built around, it's built around crisis and it's built around intervention, because that's where doctors get paid. They don't get paid for you doing these short
Health
visits.
checks. Yeah.
It's
Hmm.
got to be a big thing. And so that's where they wait until things are too far gone, and then they intervene, and they are life-saving interventions when they're necessary. But that's not what we treat. We want to get way ahead of the game and help you prevent a lot of those conditions from ever crossing the radar.
It's a very interesting system because it is great. The medical system's great for emergency care, but it's terrible around inflammation. Terrible. And
Yeah.
inflammation is one of the leading causes of disease, not only internal inflammation, but people come in with aching backs or knees or, elbows or whatever they have, necks, and all of that is related to gut inflammation, right?
Yeah, it will be eventually. I mean, if you just had a traumatic injury, just wait. And then if you get put on like even NSAIDs like ibuprofen, acetaminophen, those are big contributors to your intestinal permeability and dysregulated biome. And then if you're on, prednisone, or if you get a cortisone injection in your spine or your knee, not only is that going to disrupt the gut biome, but we see people end up with full-blown diabetes because of the glucocorticoid receptors just get oversaturated, and you get this massive influx of blood sugar dysregulation. So,
Wow.
so yeah.
So it actually does it helps one thing temporarily and does a lot more damage. I don't know. There's a lot to know and a lot to understand. And by filling out that form, so that does give people a chance to have a consultation with the healthcare person at your office, right?
Yeah, it's true. Yep. And
Okay.
they'll find out exactly what your health goals are. They'll ask you questions that most medical clinics won't ask, and they will dive deep into your history, and then they'll get you ready to meet with one of our medical providers. We've also included a free bundle where people can get the Peptide Blueprint. They can also get my Fitness 50 at Age 100 tool. I created that with Dan Sullivan, who's got a goal to live to be 156. He's one of my mentors.
Wow.
And
Wow.
and so he's 80 and he just gets younger all the time. But he said, what are the things that I want to be doing as a 100-year-old that a fit 50-year-old can do? And so I have 11 benchmarks there. And so if you can prove that you can do all 11 of those, then you get a t-shirt. We'll send you a t-shirt. So
Fit 50 at 100, at 100. That's
that's
interesting.
it.
Yep, that makes a lot of sense. Um, so tell me a little bit about the Eastern part of the program. So I know that this is a balance. You call it EastWest Health. What's the combination between the two that you're talking about here?
Well, the some of the Eastern medical philosophies I think are just beautiful. I mean, in China, for example, the culture is so deep and rich, and the emperors had three things in mind when the medicine was created, and that's what we've brought into the present day. The first thing the emperor wanted was immortality, and most of the emperors died because they were working with these alchemists who would put like mercury and these different elixirs, and unfortunately they didn't work, and a lot of them did. We have on record that they died from those. Obviously we don't use those today, but in this pursuit of longevity or immortality, they learned a lot of things on how the body works and how to gently move it into the right direction. The second thing they wanted is vitality. They wanted to have strong armies. They wanted to have robust workers. They were very industrious. I mean, they had a printing press 2000 years before the Gutenberg printing press came out in Europe. I mean, like we think, oh, the Gutenberg press, it changed everything, but there's this whole other side of the world in China. I mean, they wouldn't even trade with the Europeans. There's nothing that the Europeans had to offer of value for a long time until the Europeans discovered opium and started making opium and tobacco. But anyway, they wanted vitality. And then the third thing they wanted was virility. They wanted to have lots of kids to expand the empire. And that worked really well until China completely changed with Mao Zedong and they one-child policy. But what we brought into EastWest Health is we said, well, the things that worked in the past still work in the biology today. We haven't evolved that much. I mean, that's just, 10,000 years is nothing in terms of genetic evolution. And so we actually find that some of the same herbs, the acupuncture, the energy systems in the body, I mean, we're learning more and more about just how valid that science is. And so we keep the traditional, the ancient medicine, and then we also bring in the Western or the innovative, the modern technologies that are natural based that will accelerate your health far into the future. And we combine those two.
So you talked once about inflammation, not inflammation in the body, but infections. How do we get these chronic infections in our bodies, in our gut? And then how do you get rid of them?
I think the first thing is you got to figure out like, okay, what kind of infection is it? And then you can kind of trace back the lineage of where you may have gotten it.
Hmm.
The way you do that is through a test that every person in our clinic loves, which is a stool test, right? You get to collect your stool and send it off in a box, and it's
Yes,
not
it
the
is
most
very
pleasant.
interesting. No,
It
not
is,
really.
but the data is probably some of the most powerful data that you can receive because then we can see, oh, if you've got Klebsiella, for example, it's like, well, have you been in certain parts of the world, or do you have a pet that you're letting your dog lick your mouth? I know it sounds like I see it all the time still, and I'm like, you have no idea. You're getting a very severe infection, but
Oh my
um,
gosh.
yeah, and then you can see different parasites, and a lot of parasites come from under the fingernails. I have people who tell me, I couldn't have a parasite, I don't travel. It's like, well, do you ever eat out? Well, yeah, I eat out. Okay, well, there could be someone preparing your food who didn't quite get under the fingernails or forgot to put on the gloves. And so it could come from various sources, but really what I find, Lisa, is it's not necessarily that one exposure. Usually the one exposure is no big deal. It's the fact that we grew up in a sterile environment. I grew up on a farm, which was great, but there's a lot of chemicals that were put on the farm when I was growing up, unfortunately in the 80s and early 90s, that changed my biome. But without those chemicals, I mean, I still have a pretty robust immune system in spite of all that. But if you're not exposed to dirt, if you're not exposed to other people, if you're not around other things, and if your diet's bland and it's got a bunch of Roundup that's been sprayed on those plants and some of these herbicides and pesticides, it changes the biome. And then what we've seen is if you take an Aborigines stool, they've got almost 2 or 3 times more phylum and more diversity in their gut than the people who live in industrialized countries like the United States or Great Britain, Europe. And so it's the diversity of the diet that really is the biggest thing. It's not necessarily that singular exposure.
My goodness. I mean, it teaches you to not try to put your kids in a bubble and to let them go out and be in the dirt as much as possible so they can develop that type of robust immune system as children. Because many kids parents don't let their kids get dirty anymore.
Oh man, and during the government lockdown, I mean the pandemic, kids can't touch each other. They got
Right.
masks on. We're not shaking hands, and I mean it's our immune systems are so they're a lot. The intelligence is created when you're around other people, and then that's what is informing your immune system about what's a threat, what's not a threat, and then when you block all those pathways. I think it got a lot more of us in trouble than it helped.
Wow. Well, it's over time, we're learning so much about all of this. And I think one of the best things that anyone could do is start with a detoxification protocol. I mean, we just start there. And where would someone start on a detox protocol?
Yeah. Well, and once again, it depends on the labs. But
Right.
once we see, okay, well, but typically, like, think of the drainage systems in your body, think of the lymphatic system. You can jump on a trampoline and that moves your limbs. You can eat some of the sirtuin activation foods like the mint and the parsley and cilantro, and that's a really good way of detoxing every day. Um, there's great things you can do just starting there, getting in a sauna, doing cold plunges, having some temperature variations. Even like we detox when we exercise, and I think that's probably the number one thing that I've seen in all the longevity studies is it's like, well, you can't out peptide, you can't out hormone, you can't out eat a sedentary lifestyle because just movement is healing. And so that's a really good place to detox. And then there's so many different nuances we could get into based on if you do have an infection in your gut, then there's a specific removal process you want to do. Or if you do have Lyme disease, you got to prepare it before you bring it out. Or heavy metals, like a lot of people, they'll do these invasive heavy metal procedures, like chelation, and it makes them sicker because the rest of the body wasn't
Hmm.
prepared.
It's interesting because I had Hashimoto's, and I was probably for years, or probably decades, talking to the endocrinologist, and they had me on this Synthroid over and over and over again. And every 6 months, you have to meet with them. And I kept hearing the Synthroid isn't absorbing. It's not absorbing. Your body's not absorbing it. Are you not taking it? Did you forget? How come it's not absorbing? And I'm like, how come you aren't asking me the real questions? Like, yes, I'm taking it. Why isn't my body absorbing it? That's the real question. What is going on that my body's not uptaking whatever this thyroid hormone should have been? And
Wow.
when I finally got to the place of the detoxification, I was realizing, oh, my body wasn't going to absorb vitamin C
Yeah.
because it was in a toxic state. So I had to start with the liver and then start with the kidneys and then do the binders and get all of that stuff. I mean, it's a process. This is not for the weak. This is not a
No.
take 5 pills, 10 days, you're done, like most antibiotics. This
Right.
is a 6-month process, and it takes a monthly regime you got to be dedicated to it.
You really do.
How many people do you think would not do something like this because they wouldn't want to change their lifestyle?
That's a good question. I think that's probably maybe 90% of humans. We resist change. And so we identify with who we are right now, and we are kind of what we do if you're, and so we get stuck on these certain patterns and habits. And so most people just don't really have the courage to change. But if they're listening to your show, then it's probably like 5% are not willing to make the changes. So,
Yeah. I mean, if you're going to do something like this, then do it and commit to it. And, I feel like that a lot of people are looking for the quick fixes on things, but it's once you get to a certain age, quick fixes don't really work any longer. And yes, you can be on a vitamin protocol, but your body might not even be accepting the vitamin protocol. It all depends on how you want to feel. So, I think it would be great to start off with some type of a detox program if you have it. And then when you get past the detox program, then you start layering things in like peptides or vitamin protocols or whatever it is. You can go to Ageless Future. Is it Ageless Future? Yeah, .com. You can talk to a healthcare professional. You can do all these things, but it's a matter of how good do you want to feel? And that is where the commitment begins. I got by for a long time on exercise. I would just feel like yucky in the morning, get on my bike, feel better about 20 minutes in, be fine. And I would do that day after day after day, but I wasn't paying attention to the fact that I was not able to get up in the morning. I was having a really hard time getting out of bed. I couldn't see. That was
mm,
one of my main problems is my vision. And that tends to happen after 50 years old is that your vision starts to get clouded. Why is that? Why does the vision go at 50? I'm sure you have a really good reason for that.
Well, it's the second thing to go. The first thing that ages the fastest are our joints, and then the second are the eyes.
Why?
And I don't, I think the biggest issue is we're not getting out in the sun at the right times. As the sun's rising, as the sun's setting, we're looking at things up close. We put a lot of
Screens all
strain on
day.
our,
Yeah.
yeah, we put a lot
Mm.
of strain, and we cover our eyes up with sunglasses every time we're outside. And yeah, that's appropriate if you're, high noon, but the other times you want the sun to actually, it resets all the receptors in your brain for circadian rhythms. So and
I
and our
want
sleep
that.
is not optimized either, so that's probably a big thing.
Right. So could people take the peptides without going through the detox protocols?
Well, so here's the thing that we've discovered is, the membrane of the cell, when you start having all these toxic accumulation around it, like it's very hard to get signaling, but you can with if you're doing if you're pulling away some of those toxins, you can actually get really phenomenal results with detoxification when you add in certain peptides. There's some pathways we wouldn't even work on until we got things fixed, but because like KPV or lorazepam, these are peptides that are naturally made in your gut, and so they actually move the detoxification process forward even faster than if you were to do it without the peptides.
And do you have to take them at a certain time of day? Is it better to take some of those in the morning?
Yeah, some peptides, and that we only use compounding pharmacies that are licensed, but you'll see it on the prescription. It will actually have the dosing instructions. But yeah, some are, before bed. A lot of them are in a fasted state, 90 minutes away from food. And then some peptides, it's just, there's not really, doesn't really matter when you take them.
And is this something you have to be on the rest of your life, or does it stimulate the body to produce its own peptides eventually?
Yeah, once you get those genes, like I mentioned, like once you have that communication, it's kind of like a relationship. Once you and your husband, you got the communication, and you're keeping that communication line healthy, then maybe the therapist goes away and you guys maintain that harmony.
Aha. So this is something that you, unlike medication that you're dependent on, you can actually retrain the body to produce these peptides by itself.
That's it. Yeah.
I love it. I love it. You mentioned something earlier about an autoimmune illness. And what did you experience? How do you think you got the autoimmune illness, and how did you heal that?
Well, I think, similar to you, I had Hashimoto's, and it's definitely more common to see in females than males. And I was young, but the way that I found out is I went to a naturopathic doctor who was also an acupuncturist, and this was after 5 doctors misdiagnosed me. They just said, "Oh, everything looks normal. You're just stressed." And so finally, when I got the right labs ran, we looked at my thyroid peroxidase antibodies, and they were like 680, and they were through the roof. And he's like, "Well, this is why you have all the symptoms." I was feeling achy all the time. You mentioned in the morning, like waking up, and I would go for runs and I would feel a little bit better, but then my joints were so painful and my back ached all. It was just weird. And I was young. But the naturopathic doctor asked me, like, "Well, were you exposed to chemicals at all?" And I said, "No, maybe just a little bit of Roundup." And and that was where he explained to me, like, "Okay, well, here's what Roundup is. The active ingredient is glyphosate or glyphosate, for those of you who pronounce it differently. And it's a broad spectrum antibiotic. I mean, it destroys the gut biome, and it just left my body very sensitive and in a vulnerable place where I ended up having an autoimmune issue."
So we eat those glyphosates all the time if we eat food that is genetically modified, not organic. Even the organic food has glyphosates in it, doesn't it?
Unfortunately, a lot of it that's tested does, and that's where, if you do some local farming, you're going to be in a much safer place. than
Mm.
if you're even if you're eating organic from a grocery store. Unfortunately, California, which is one of the most just an agricultural mecca, like one of the most amazing states on the planet. It's been sprayed with more glyphosate than probably any other place in the world. And
Ah,
so a lot of the organic foods, unfortunately, have some traces of glyphosate in it if they come from California.
wow, interesting. Right. I mean, it makes sense because a lot of our agriculture is based around the coastal cities, and that, brings the trades in, the trade winds off of the coast and carries it into the other farming areas in the, yeah, Central Coast. I can understand that. And it's not an ideal situation, even though you're trying to eat nor, organic foods, but it completely switches on autoimmune illnesses. Hmm.
Yeah. Yep.
Um, and so what did you do in order to start to release that or change the body? Was it all the peptide protocol that you're describing now, the trial and error, and you figured it out?
No, I mean, 25 years ago, it was like
Wow.
we had to eliminate foods. I was on a vegan diet because I was just like trying to figure out answers. And that was like the worst thing for my genes. And especially growing up on a cattle ranch, it was like a little bit of an insult to my family. I'm joking on that one, but they were fine. They just wanted me to be healthy. Um, but
Yeah,
we actually learned, like I was gluten free and I eliminated dairy, I eliminated some of the triggers. Eggs were actually a really big one for me,
me
probably the
too. Yeah.
biggest. And then I had to get rid of all nightshades. So
Hmm.
it was actually just through diet. And then I got into yoga and breathing and meditation, and I learned how to calm my busy brain a little bit.
Hmm.
And that's really where I started to notice a big shift. I started using Chinese herbs, and I would drink these really gnarly concoctions of like
Hmm.
thick tea, and it's like the bitter the better. But it really transformed my health to the point where I said, you know what? I always thought that natural medicine or alternative medicine is what it was called at the time was like hokey, but then I realized like maybe there's some truth to this. And that's when I left the University of Utah. I went to Hawaii and studied out there at more of an integrated medical school. And then I learned not only like Chinese medicine, but also Western medicine from more of an integrated perspective. And that's where I started learning like, okay, there's things I can do from lifestyle, from an herbal perspective. I can run the right labs and really predict it that way. But I still had to walk a really fine line, and my antibodies were elevated until I got into stem cell therapy. And that was about 14 years ago. And then I did a stem cell IV, and that's what calmed them down. And then I learned
Wow.
about peptides after I learned about the brain treatment, which was 2 years later.
And the stem cells you're talking about are available in Utah. You really helped that type of the law change there, didn't you?
Yeah,
Not available everywhere.
it's not, and we finally got this a bill. It's called Senate Bill 198. And what it does is it protects regenerative medicine clinics to use what's considered non-FDA approved stem cell therapies from perinatal tissue. So that would be like the umbilical cord, the placental tissue, and even the amniotic fluid, as long as it's not been manipulated and as long as it's following all the tissue reference guidelines set up by the FDA. And we can't make claims. It's not like we're saying, hey, we can reverse your diabetes or your autoimmunity or anything like that with these treatments. But we've put in the work and we've shown the safety and efficacy of these treatments. And so now Utah is one of the first states to actually protect the use of this, because the FDA for a lot of years, they writing letters to all of us saying,
Mhm.
hey, stop doing this, stop using it. But we're changing people's lives who didn't have other solutions. And I saw what it did for mine as well. And so now we have some protection.
It's a phenomenal story. And it's good that there's still guidelines around it. And you're not using pig and sheep and everything. You're using uh, women that consent to use the cells from either a placentia that is no longer being used,
Right. Yeah.
or that's you don't need that anymore after you give birth, and that there's actually a use for that. And I think this is absolute cutting edge science and something that is going to become the norm because of the power of these types of healing modalities. So I want to say thank you. You have so much great information, lots more to learn here. If you want to get a consultation with one of the healthcare professionals, the consultation is free. Is that right?
Correct. Yep.
Okay, good. I didn't want to put you on the spot there. I just asked you that. And it's again, agelessfuture.com. You can just fill out this little, a few questions there and send it in, and they'll contact you, and you can have a free consultation with somebody from EastWest Health. And again, Regan Archibald is my guest. The name of your book is right here, the Peptide Blueprint.com, with my little bookmark in there.
Yeah.
The Peptide Blueprint is the name of the book. And you can find out a lot more there. That's pretty self-explanatory. Achieving optimal health and performance at any age. Thank you, Regan, so much. I appreciate your time and all your great information, and keep going.
It's been an honor, and thanks for the great work you do, Lisa.
Absolutely. Again, go to agelessfuture.com. I am Lisa Garr, and until next time, I invite you to stay aware.